Hi, I'm Alicia Michelle, and as a trained and certified Christian mindset coach, I've helped hundreds of Christian women discover brain science-based mindset tools to help them grow closer to God and break free from anxiety, perfectionism, people-pleasing, and feeling like they're never enough. The Christian Mindset Coach is the award-winning podcast that shows you how to use simple brain science principles and biblical truth to renew your mind for lasting confidence, joy, and peace. I'm so glad you're here. Grab a cozy spot and let's get started.
Hey there, welcome to today's episode of the Christian Mindset Coach with me, Alicia Michelle. Today we're talking about addiction. We're talking about brokenness. And so for those of you who are like, I'm not an addict, like I don't go to a 12-step meeting, why do I need this sort of episode? Why are we talking about this kind of as a general topic in mindset? Let me tell you, at the end of this conversation, if you still believe that you are not an addict, we need to talk because I have a guest on here today who is very well known in many circles for his Enneagram work, Ian Morgan Cron. But he has written an incredible new book called The Fix that talks about how we all suffer from this inner brokenness, this inner feeling of trying to fill ourselves up with different things. And that presents itself as addiction. And he goes through a huge long list, and he even covers some of them in our conversation today. But this long list of all of the ways that we as humans, just in our current culture, have figured out how to try to fill that hole. And so all of us, we are wired with this desire to overcome the brokenness that's in us. And I love this conversation and wanted to have him on because he has, as someone who has gone through traditional forms of recovery using the 12 steps, he is someone who has shown that the 12 steps themselves are actually quite helpful for all of us dealing with that inner brokenness. And that's what he talks about in his book, The Fix. So let me tell you a little bit about Ian if you're not familiar with him. Ian Morgan Cron is a best-selling author, psychotherapist, Enneagram teacher, Episcopal priest, and the host of the popular podcast Typology. His books include the Enneagram primer, The Road Back to You, an Enneagram journey to self-discovery. Many of you may have read that book, which has sold over 1 million copies. The novel Chasing Francis, the spiritual memoir Jesus, My Father, the CIA, and Me, and the story of you, an Enneagram journey to becoming your true self. Ian has become someone who is a very trusted voice on the area of the Enneagram, but in this new book, he opens up about addiction, what his own journey has been like, and again, how the 12 steps can be a very powerful way for any of us who are dealing with this brokenness to begin to work through what's inside. It provides a systematic approach to that. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to our conversation with Ian Morgan Cron. Hey, Ian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alicia. Glad to be here.
Yes. Well, I know that you are known for Enneagram stuff, but we're going to first talk about your most recent book, which is called The Fix. And it's a fascinating book because you talk about the 12 steps and how this is often a way for us to understand how we can connect with God and with ourselves just by this 12-step method that a lot of people have used for years in recovery. So I like the book because you talk about this kind of overall feeling that we all struggle with of brokenness. So can you share what happened in your life that kind of came to an apex for you where you realized I need to use something like the 12 steps and I have this brokenness inside of me?
Yeah. So my first journey into recovery was decades ago now. I was a young guy. I was 27 years old, and I came into the rooms of recovery and to the 12 steps because of a problem with drinking.
Mhm.
But I like to say that in that first go around, that it was me auditing the class, right? Like I wasn't quite taking it for credit yet. But the good news is that being involved in that program for a few years and working the steps marginally expelled my desire to drink. And then I didn't drink or use any substances for decades.
Mhm.
Along comes COVID. In 2020, I had a relapse and came back into the rooms of recovery. And then as I like to say, I now was taking the course for credit. And
Yeah.
I discovered that the 12 steps were not only revolutionary for me, but they could be revolutionary for anybody, right? Whether they identify as a person with a substance use disorder or not. In fact, the subtitle of the fix is How the 12 Steps Offer a Surprising Path of Transformation for the Well-Adjusted, the Down and Out, and everyone in between. So everyone can benefit dramatically from what the 12 steps have to offer.
Right. Wow. What was that like for you going through it a second time? What made it different?
It was no better than the first time.
Well, not the easy part of it, like not that, but what changed for you that it made it so that you were not just auditing it anymore, but it was just real?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was blessed with the gift of desperation, right? Like it was something like, okay, I need some help here. And I think that grace comes to us in proportion to our need, right? And so there was this overwhelming sense of gratitude and commitment to this kind of way of life. And the second time around, it stuck in a really cool, wonderful way. And it was such a blessing to my walk with God, and it illuminated dimensions of the gospel I hadn't seen before that was really wonderful.
Hmm. All right. Well, I like that you describe that brokenness in your book. You talk about how we're fractions yearning to become whole numbers. You use lots of other great examples, like from C.S. Lewis, describing that longing that we have inside us, that it's like a land we know exists, but we've not visited. So how does understanding that we're all gifted with this inner ache, how does understanding that help us better know how to deal with it?
Yeah. And so in the book, in fact, I call it the big ache. That's
Yeah.
just common to all human beings walking around a falling world, right? And this sort of universal feeling of homelessness, spiritual homelessness. And we can all say that we have a relationship with Christ or with God. And yes, and that is in fact true. But there's a kind of missing wholeness, right? That is yet to be ours. And so, one of the things that people do when they have that sense of existential dis-ease, right? Not at ease in the world, right? Inquietude. And this can come in the form of anxiety, depression, trauma. It can come as weariness. It can come as low self-esteem. It can come in so many forms, right? That big ache inside. And disappointment with life, disappointment with church, disappointment with God, disappointment, you know what I mean? Like with ourselves. It's all part of the big ache, right? This ball inside. Well, human beings, when that happens, will often go in search of external solutions to solve internal problems. And that external solution could be overeating. It could be workaholism. It could be drugs. It could be drinking. It could be gambling. It could be perfectionism. It could be codependency. I mean, the list goes on and on, right? These are all addictive, compulsive behaviors. And eventually what happens is that your external solution becomes a bigger problem than the problem it was designed or you were hoping it would solve.
Yeah.
Now you got two problems.
Yeah.
And now you got the inner ache, right? Or whatever is going on inside of you and the solution that has now turned into a problem for it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that really, I think, helps us better understand addiction. We're trying to fill that with an outside thing. And I think I heard you describe it somewhere else, the concept of addiction as the tide creeping in, that we don't notice it. It just happens a little at a time. And so how did it sneak up on you? Or how have you seen it maybe in other people that have struggled with addiction that you worked with?
Well, everyone's story is a little bit different. I've met some people who, when they discovered a substance or a behavior or a person that they became addicted to, that it was very sudden. Like they went from 0 to 100 in a heartbeat, right? In part because it's like, oh my gosh, I have found a solution. You know what I mean? Like, oh, this finally makes me feel at home in my own skin, or this gives me a sense of control, or this gives me a sense of security and safety that I didn't know I was missing, or all of the above, right? So it can happen really quickly. But for many people, it happens over time. You discover this thing, and in the beginning, it works without consequences. Like there's no negative consequences. It's just working. And you're like, whoa, I have found the magic bullet. But as they like to say, addictions start off as fun, and then it turns into fun with problems, and then it just turns into problems.
Mm.
That's how the tide rises.
Yeah. Yeah. And the 12 steps, they are a very unique way of dealing with these areas of addiction. A lot of people have used them, but what do you see as a fundamental connection between the 12 steps and Christianity and how you describe it in the book?
Oh, they're so interwoven. So
Yeah.
first of all, the 12 steps were written by a stockbroker in the 1930s. His name was Bill W. He had a little bit of help, but he was the principal author. They derived from a Christian organization called the Oxford Group. They had 6 steps, and Bill expanded them out to 12. And what they discovered early on was that the purpose of the steps was to, like, some people think that the steps are designed to help people stop drinking or stop overeating or
Right.
to stop gambling or whatever your thing is, right? That's actually not their stated purpose. The
Mm.
stated purpose of the steps is that they would facilitate, as you worked through them, a spiritual awakening of sufficient force that it would render unnecessary your need for anything apart from God for dealing with the inner ache,
Wow. Yeah.
right? That's
Wow.
the purpose of the steps. It's not to get you to stop drinking or to stop overeating or whatever. It's to render unnecessary your need for those things, because now you have filled that hole in your soul with the thing that you were always longing for to begin with,
Mm.
right? And then the process of the steps walks you through these kind of passages, right? Where in the first 3 steps, you're mending and deepening your relationship with God. 4 through 7, you're mending and deepening your relationship with yourself. 8 and 9, you're mending and deepening your relationship with others. And then in 10 through 12, they're called the maintenance steps. It's like, oh, okay, so now that I've mended these areas of my life that have been broken, and the brokenness of those areas that were fueling my compulsive behaviors, well, now these last 3 steps are all about how do I maintain a lifestyle that keeps me growing in those 3 domains of my life,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And the beauty is, guess what? All the amazing miracles that are happening in the basements of churches where 12-step groups meet are available to everybody upstairs too. And you may be on the mild side of the addiction continuum or on the
Yeah.
severe side, but
Yeah.
regardless, you can benefit from working those steps.
Yeah, that leads straight into the question I was going to ask next, which is, so how then would you respond to someone who's like, I'm not an addict, so why do I even need to learn about the 12 steps? What does this have to do with me and my Christianity, Ian? Like, why do I care?
Yeah. Well, Gerald May, a renowned psychiatrist who was a person of faith, once wrote, to be alive is to be addicted, and to be alive and addicted is to stand in need of grace, right? All of us find ourselves in patterns of compulsive, unhealthy relationships with, maybe it's a person, maybe it's a behavior like, porn or gambling would fall into that category, or maybe it's substances of some kind, right? And we're just numbing ourselves, anesthetizing ourselves, medicating ourselves, right? They're like little self-prescribed treatment plans, right? Like, I've worked with a bunch of people in coaching relationships, and I got 2 right now. They're workaholics. And let me tell you something. They're addicts. Like, they are
Yes.
super successful, but it's come at a very, very high cost.
Yeah.
And they don't know how to stop. So I've got them involved in Workaholics Anonymous, and we're going through the 12 steps together. Everybody's got something, Alicia, everybody, right?
Yeah.
It's just human nature, right? It's actually kind of even physiologically wired into our brains. And as Brene Brown says, right, we are now part of the most addicted cohort in history, right?
Absolutely.
Like, it is epidemic. Now, so the person who says, I'm not an addict, all right, well, let's just take out the word alcohol, right? First step, we admitted we were powerless over blank and that our lives had become unmanageable. That's the first step.
Yeah.
How about, can everybody cop to this? We admitted we were powerless over sin, over our selfishness, over our desire to control and manipulate people around us to make our lives better, right? Like, there are so many things you can fill in the blank with. Like, I don't know anybody who can't cop to those things.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Yeah. And so I guess then would you say, if you're not sure, like if someone's like, well, I'm not really sure what that would be, like some of us, like for me, it's workaholism. I've known that for a long time. And that's something that I even have the Workaholics Anonymous book. I've never gone to it. I know, right? But that is my vice. That's my thing, working as hard as I can. And God has had to do some breaking in me to get me to the other side of that. So I recognize that's mine. But if someone isn't sure, like, what did you say that, what is that thing in your life that is like an idol or things that fills you up? Like what could be that thing? How would you?
Idol's not a bad word.
Yeah.
Well, theologically, idle is not a bad word.
Yeah.
Right? And, I think if anyone does just even a scan of their interior world, it's not going to be hard to figure out what this is. Like, I'll give you an example of one. How about people who are addicted to their children?
Mm.
They're
Yes.
they're overly enmeshed in their children or
Right.
adult children, even their adult children's lives. They're just hooked, right?
Yeah.
They can't stop calling. They can't stop worrying. They can't stop, fixing. They
So
can't
true.
stop trying to control. And you know what I mean? And
Mhm.
or it's in a relationship with a partner, right? And you
Mhm.
realize, I'm kind of this is not healthy, right? Like I am just too enmeshed in this person's life, and
Yeah.
and they're not appreciating it. I'm not doing great. People become obsessed, like in relationships, right? In ways that are super unhealthy. That's an indication there's a red flag that should go up. Here's a working definition of addiction. So an addiction is any unhealthy compulsive relationship with a person, a substance, or a behavior that has mood altering effects and negative consequences.
Mm.
So in your case, as a
Okay.
workaholic, right?
Yeah.
All right, great. Now, unfortunately, here's the hard thing about you have what's called a process addiction, right? So it's not to a substance, but
Yeah.
to a behavior, right?
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
So,
And I have to work. Like I can't not work. So not
okay.
like alcohol, I could give it up.
All right. Let me put my therapist hat on.
Okay. All right.
All right. Can we go there for a second?
Sure. Sure.
What were you trying to solve?
For me, it was trying to solve the question of being enough, being worthy, like proving that I was enough. And that is just, it's a bottomless hole. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Bottomless hole. Trying to fill it with the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Right? In the Bible, we call that drinking from the wrong well. Right. Now, it had a mood altering effect, right? Because it buttressed your self-esteem, made you feel better about yourself, made you feel valuable, worthwhile in the eyes of others and in the eyes of yourself.
Right.
But it was never enough, right? So it's self-escalating like all addictions are. Now you got to work harder and harder and harder and harder. Now, did it have negative consequences?
Yes, it almost took my life in 2017 because of a huge medical crisis that came on from lack of dealing with what was inside and not taking care of myself, stress, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. So at that moment, you start to realize I have an external solution to an internal problem that has now become a bigger problem than the problem I was trying to solve.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. So you're just a perfect example of someone who had a compulsive behavior that you couldn't stop on your own, that required you to put yourself through the paces of a program of some kind that brought you centeredness and healing. And yes, every day, I'm sure you're still tempted to look to work for some kind of, self-validation and to raise your stock in the eyes of others because you're concerned about that. Yeah. And it's like, but now you have tools in a program of recovery that help you decide to not use that spiritual workaround anymore.
Yeah.
Because now you're getting it from God, right? And through God reliance, you're no longer relying on yourself and your own unaided willpower to run your life.
Yes.
Right. And then all of a sudden, workaholism isn't as big a deal anymore.
Yeah. And I think what comes with when you have an addiction, you know what it is, and you are working through it, it's always that Achilles heel. It's always that thing that you need to just be aware of, that it exists, period, that this is kind of the thing I tend to go towards. But like you said, I mean, it could be anything. When I was younger and a teen, it was wanting to have a boyfriend. It was wanting to feel validated in that way. It could be, like you said, it could be alcohol. It could be drugs. It's 1,000 things. So I think it's just, instead of maybe trying to nail down, this is the only thing that I struggle with, just like you said, going back to, we have this ache and we are going to try to fill it in different ways. In this season, this is the thing that I have tried to use to fill it.
You know what? People aren't just addicted to one thing. They have multiple addictions.
Right.
Right. Like what I remember when I first began doing my work, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not just addicted to substances. I'm addicted to people pleasing.
Yep.
I'm addicted to avoiding conflict.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm addicted to perfectionism.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And I started to realize, I'm trying to find solutions to problems in my internal world that only God can solve. And I'm trying to do it through these crazy behaviors, and they're not working. And I need help to disentangle myself from them.
Right. That's kind of the bottom line to all of it, is just noticing that we have the crazy behaviors. But I think, Ian, the part of the issue is that so many of us are we're just not self-reflective. We're so busy. We're just running. We're not taking the time, or it's scary to think about what's going on inside. And so we just keep jumping from one thing to another to keep filling the hole.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, I get calls all the time from people, right? So recently I got a call from a mom whose two 14-year-old sons she thinks now have addictions to sports betting. I mean, you can't watch a pro football game
Wow.
anymore without
Yeah.
watching ads for sports betting, right? And people are
Right.
going crazy on that stuff.
Yeah.
Crazy. They're like killing themselves on it.
Yeah.
Or how about just the parent I talked to this week who discovered that their child had spent 9 hours on TikTok in one day.
Mm.
And like literally the kid goes into withdrawal if you take the phone away. Right? They go into a mood spiral, they become irritable and angry, and that sounds like an addict to me.
That sounds like a lot of teens right now too.
Sounds like a lot of adults.
Yes, adults
literally, I
too.
was on an airplane the other day. I was flying back from Wyoming and to Nashville, and I'm on the plane and I'm looking around. There's no sound because everybody's got their face in their phones. No one's talking. No one's doing anything. They're just, I looked around the whole plane. Every adult in the plane has their face in a phone.
Yeah.
And they can't stop.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, that may be something where you're like, well, that's not, I'm not losing my job or my marriage or stuff like that over it. Oh, okay. Well, how about what's it doing to your relationship with your children that every time they talk to you, you're stuck in your phone?
Yeah, exactly.
Like these things have consequences.
Right. Yeah.
And to stop them, sometimes discipline isn't enough.
Right.
Like, go ahead and try it. You know, like some people will say to me, I don't know if I'm an alcoholic. And I'm like, okay, well, just stop. And they're like, what? And I'm like, well, just stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're like, well, you know, and suddenly I'm like, that's interesting. Right? It's not if I said to you, you know, just stop drinking apple juice, would you be giving me this many problems?
Right. Exactly.
Like we just live in a world and we live with a brain too that's kind of wired for addiction. And the beauty is I'm really grateful. I'm so grateful that I have this issue in my life because what it has done is it has brought me to a place of reliance and intimacy with God that I couldn't have gotten any other way.
Wow. So true. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And maybe that is part of, like you said, it's obviously we're wired this way, but maybe that is part of his ingenuity behind it because he knows we're independent, we're intelligent creatures. We are the only creatures that have addictions. I mean, things like this, right? I mean, there's no animals that do these sorts of things. And yet we are the creatures that have connections with God. So maybe it's like a way to say your addictive personality needs to be connected with me, not with the things of the world.
So I have this guy I know. He was in treatment for an alcohol problem, and he has a horrible story of growing up, right? And he had so much trauma and so much pain from growing up. And he was 28 years old, and was in treatment. And his counselor, who was this very jovial Australian woman, sat down across from him, and she said, in their first meeting, she goes, "Good on you for finding alcohol." And he went,
"What?"
And she said,
"Okay.
You might have died without it.
Yeah.
You were carrying so much pain. And of course you found it. Of course you found something. But here we are. And now," she said, "maybe this is an invitation. Maybe you could understand your addiction as an invitation, not as a moral failure or being a bad person or whatever, because I don't think that's what it is. It's actually an invitation from God to a relationship with him that you did not previously know was available to you."
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. An invitation, opportunity. If we could reframe it and not be so afraid of admitting those things, it would be easier to recognize, I think.
Yeah. Can we just normalize the conversation around doing dumb stuff?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, can we just not normalize this conversation? Like, so here's something crazy, right? In most people's churches, or in many churches around the country, there are 12-step meetings happening in the basement after hours, right? Or before hours, right? I go to a meeting locally here in Nashville, and it's in the basement of a church, 7:30 in the morning, right? And I'm always thinking as a pastor, do the people upstairs have any idea of the miracles that are happening down in these dingy basements of theirs?
Wow.
Like, do they have any idea of
Yeah.
the good stuff that God is doing down here? And do they have any idea that they could derive the same benefits from the steps that are down in these rooms?
Right. Yeah.
Where talking about brokenness is normal. Talking authentically is normal. Being
Yes.
raw, and there's a lot of laughter in those rooms too, contrary to what people might think. Tons of laughter and openness and joy and healing and change and realness. Do they not know that they could have that as well? That the very miracles that are happening right under their noses could be theirs upstairs? And that's part of the reason I wrote The Fix, which is like, hey, church, wake up, man.
Yes.
Like, there is this program for you, and it's completely consistent with the teachings of Jesus. You could use this program and realize the same miracles in your own life if you chose to follow them.
Yeah, no, I love it. I feel like there is an awakening that's happening in some churches. That conversation about being real and mental health and things like that is one that I've had with my pastor. We've been bringing in speakers to talk a little bit more about that and just have opportunities to share testimonies, to share, we don't have to show up as these perfect people every week. We can be broken. In fact, this is the place where we should be able to be broken together.
Just think about this for a second. Let me ask you a question. How many people would say, if you asked a person this question, what do you think that most of them would say? How safe do you feel in church?
Yeah. I think, okay, so I would answer that two different ways. Because I think, yes, on a Sunday morning in a huge crowd of people, I don't feel safe overall. But if the church is doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is making those individual connections, then in small groups, in Bible studies that where we're connecting deeply, like I can think of 10 people that I would, if I felt like I had some huge thing that I was working through that I needed to talk to someone about, absolutely I could go to them in the church.
Yes.
So I don't know.
So to be clear, not every church is struggling with this.
Yeah.
Though most are. I can just say as a pastor, that's been my experience.
Yeah.
That there's so much image management and curation going on upstairs. There's so much shame around being a broken sinner. And it's like, I got to look like a great Christian all the time because I'm afraid to tell the truth about my marriage or about my heart or about my life. And so, I think a good teaching series on the 12 steps would go a long way to helping some folks. And also creating a culture, this is the bigger thing, a culture in which we've normalized conversations around what's not working for us.
Yes.
Right. And then finding attachment to God in such a way that we're not looking for crazy solutions to things that are never going to work. They're never going to work.
Yeah. Here, Ian, this is why that makes sense. Because we, as a church, I'm going to speak kind of generally, we want to grow closer to God. We want to know God. But if we approach God from this sanitized, everything is great, Sunday morning kind of look, then how are we ever supposed to get close to him? How are we ever supposed to be real with him? But if we admit that this is where we're at and what we need, then it's like God is right there. He wants to be with us. But if we keep putting up this front that everything's good and we're all happy, perfect church people, it's just not going to happen.
Right. Yeah. And that's why when church people, and there's plenty of them who find their way into the basements to deal with whatever their issues are.
Yeah.
They go, oh my gosh, listen, I took a friend of mine the other day, and actually, this person because they're quite a famous musician in the faith-based world. And this person, I took him to a meeting, and he looked at me when it was over. He said, why can't church be like this?
Right.
Why can't church be like this?
Wow.
And I'm like, I don't know, but you're welcome to keep coming back. It's like, and they've kept coming back because it's like, oh, I have so needed this program. I have so needed the steps, and I've so needed this community.
And I think people need, yes, they need the steps, but they need, like what you just said, community. They need to know that they're not the only ones who are struggling with this, because maybe on a deep level, even if we're not willing to admit it, we know about the brokenness in us. But who do we take it to? And if there's no one else around us being real.
Yeah. Now, here's where I've seen where that can sort of fall apart a little bit.
Okay.
Is oftentimes, yes, community will always help, right? Being in community. That said, to be in community without a plan for transformation.
Yeah.
can just be people sitting around on a regular basis trading ignorances.
True. No, very
Like,
true.
we're just swimming
Yeah.
around here. It's like the thing about the 12 steps is it's very solution oriented, right?
Yeah.
It's like, all right, well, okay, here we are. We're down here. We got a problem. What's the plan? Well, here's the plan, right? So you get community and a plan,
Mm,
right?
right.
For dealing with those broken places in your life. And
Mm.
that's why the fix, there's a workbook that I put a lot of work into. It's 120 pages. It's really great, if I say so myself. And but the reason I did it was because I was like, a lot of people are not going to say, I'm going to go to an AA meeting or an NA meeting or an OA meeting or whatever your meeting, a sex addiction meeting. They're not ready for that. So I'm like, okay, tell you what, just get 5 people and form your own little 12-step group, and you can meet for 4 months. You can go
Awesome.
through the steps, do
Yeah.
your work, see what happens. You will benefit from it.
It's awesome. No, I love that. I love that you've made it practical. So that's good to know. And I'm glad you mentioned it here, because that would be my next question is, okay, read this book. Now what? How do I actually implement it? How do I actually do it when maybe I'm not comfortable? I don't know what my brokenness is, or I can't say it's this, or I'm not comfortable, like you said, going to a meeting like that. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
powerful.
I don't know. These days, Alicia, I don't know. Maybe it's just the circles I run in, and I don't just run in Christian circles, right? Like I have lots and lots of friends all over the place. Do you know of anybody that doesn't know they're broken recently? Like I just haven't, I don't meet a lot of people. I mean, periodically, and if I do, they just seem to lack any kind of self-awareness.
Yeah. I was going to say, I
You know?
think there are people who maybe know that they're broken, but they are so removed from what it could be that they can't even go
Yeah.
there. So they're
Yeah,
just
and
like, I can't even touch it.
yeah. And I think those folks, like our addictions, our brokenness, and the consequences of it, it just breeds in the dark.
Yeah.
It breeds in isolation, right? It
Yeah.
just grows.
Mm-hmm.
And I ache for those people,
Yes.
because they're just living lives of quiet desperation,
Mhm.
and you got to burn a lot of calories to
For
do that.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's transition. I was going to ask about the Enneagram, but to kind of get that discussion started and to kind of continue with what we're talking about here, when you can think about the Enneagram, how would you say, again, speaking very generally, the numbers, each of the different types of the Enneagram tend to deal with that inner ache inside?
Yeah, well, you could actually make a case that each of the Enneagram types has a kind of core addiction
Mm.
that to deal with the inner ache. So if you're, what's your number? Are you a 3 or an 8?
I am a 3.
Yeah, right.
Yes,
Okay, I could
I'm
have
a
guessed
3,
that
but
from your.
but strong wing on 2. But yeah,
Okay,
you
well,
can guess
there's
that.
not.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, well, a workaholic,
Exactly.
right? Now there are other types that could be workaholics, right? So
Mm.
I don't want to peg it, but that's the one that wouldn't surprise me. Like
Yeah.
maybe it's a 1 or a 3 or an
Mm.
8. But any type could be a workaholic, but some
Yeah.
would be maybe more leaning in that direction more naturally.
Yeah.
But look at ones. Ones want to be good and they want to avoid fault and blame, and perfectionism for the unhealthy improver becomes a kind of cocktail, right? Like that helps to assuage or deal with that inner ache, right?
Mhm.
2s might find a relief from the inner ache by meeting the needs of other people and winning their appreciation and approval. 3s
Yeah.
might do it through the pursuit of success and achievement,
Mhm.
right? So I could go through all the numbers, right? And you would find that at their core, each of them has kind of a core addictive pattern,
Mm.
and that shows up in their personality style.
Mm. Yes, I think that's really interesting. And that honestly is what I believe the motivation side of it, and especially when you link it to addiction, is what makes the Enneagram so powerful and helping us understand ourselves and
Mhm.
getting that movement forward.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And all of us have these predictable patterns of acting, thinking, and feeling,
Yeah.
and to the point that they become habitual and they eventually have negative consequences. And guess what? We keep doing them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the first step is just being able, right, to recognizing your powerlessness over those things and
Mhm.
beginning to enter into this partnership with God where you can undo yourself from it all.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So a couple of questions that people wanted me to ask you about the Enneagram. And this is a
All right.
question that I know that you've answered, but this is the official question. What is your response to those in the Christian community that state that the Enneagram is against biblical teaching?
Oh, I'm so bored of that question.
I know.
But here's,
Wait,
I know,
I'm
but
like,
here's the reason why. Well, okay. So, all right, I get it. All right. So, look, first of all, I don't think it's true. Like, first of all, the roots of the Enneagram came from a very circuitous route, right? So it's passed
Right.
through the hands of many different kinds of people. Some who were responsible, good Christian folks, and other people that were kind of kooky. Here's what I tell people all the time. Do you go to therapy?
right. Yeah.
And they say yes. I go, well, do you know that the father of therapy was Sigmund Freud, who thought that religion was ridiculous? And yet you use terms like conscious, subconscious, unconscious all the time,
Yeah.
id, libido. You use those terms all the time. And yet, do you know that they come from somebody who was a kind of a sworn enemy of faith?
Yeah. Interesting.
Okay. And it's like, they go, oh, and I'm like, so look, the Enneagram, yeah, sure. It's passed through lots of different people's hands. Some of them were kooky. Some of them were, faithful people. Why don't we just take it back and make it ours? Because regardless of, Martin Luther once said, wherever you find the truth, you should avail yourself of it.
Mm.
Right.
Yes.
And so look, why people say, oh, it's this or it's that, or it's like, I'm like, oh my gosh, you're so anxious. I have seen the Enneagram save people's marriages, their relationships with their
Yeah.
kids. I've seen it improve their self-awareness. It's helped their jobs. I've
Right.
seen it, bring about the fruits of the Spirit in people's lives when it's handled correctly. And I'm like, really? Like, you're going to get all crazy about this? I'm like, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or I'll say to people, okay, well, do you go to yoga?
Right.
And they'll be
Oh,
like, well, yeah, I do go to yoga. And I'm like, well, do you know where that comes from?
well, yes. Yeah.
Right. And it's like,
Right.
why are you like fixating on the Enneagram as like as being something? Let's just take it back as Christians and use it through the lens of the gospel, and it'll be fantastic.
Exactly. And I get the same pushback as being someone who uses brain science, neuroscience together with mindset. Like, well, is that okay? Is that biblical? And I always say, well, did God create your brain? Did God create science? You wouldn't go to a heart doctor and say, well, let's just pray about this. You're going to trust the scientific knowledge that he has to help you find an answer. It's the same thing. You're just learning more about how God made your body.
Yeah. But I oftentimes, I don't get defensive or combative, about this, but I'm like, okay, well, let's just look at other areas of your life. And let's be consistent. If you want to say no to this, let's be consistent about other stuff you should be saying no to.
Yeah, fair.
Using the criteria that you're objecting to this on.
Sure. No, I agree. I love it. Okay. And the question was about antitypes. So on the Enneagram. So this person was asking if there's any good resources for this. So how do you better understand? And first of all, for those who don't know what that means, if you could explain what an antitype is, and then if you have any resources to help people better understand that.
Yeah, I think what they're talking about is countertypes.
Okay.
So,
the ones you go to when you're healthy and when you're in stress, right?
No.
Oh, that's different?
No, so
I didn't even understand it.
So it's kind of Enneagram 2.0. It's a sort of another level of distinction. So there's a core type. And then when you know that, you have some added clarity about your life, but it's still pretty low definition. And then you learn about your wing, and then that gives you an added distinction and a little bit more clarity about your type.
Right.
And then there are these things called subtypes.
Okay.
And there are 3 subtypes for each type. Okay. And there's a nuanced difference between each of the subtypes. Okay. And I don't want to go too far into this because it gets a little technical. But one of those 3 subtypes is a countertype. So I actually am a countertype, right? I'm what's called a self-preservation 4.
Oh, okay.
Now, what's interesting about the self-preservation 4 is that I actually don't look anything like the archetypal 4 that you read about, Now, yes, I am an artist. Yeah, I'm a songwriter. I write books. I've always been into poetry, that kind of stuff. But I actually look more like a 3 or a 7 than I do a 4. It's because I'm the countertype. So I have the same internal motivations and, struggles as a 4, but the way I present outwardly is very differently. The way I try to deal with my inner struggles appears very differently out in the world, right?
Okay.
And I'm not as eccentric as a lot of 4s can be. I don't tend to suffer on the outside. I tend to sort of keep my suffering to myself and try to compensate for it in other ways, right?
Okay.
So again, once you start getting into subtypes and countertypes and things like that, it is super helpful, but you could just know your type and wing and, gain just a lot from that without having to. And if you want to read a good book on that, Beatrice Chestnut, The Complete Enneagram, is a good resource for that.
Okay.
She's kind of the granddaughter of subtypes, and she teaches them quite well.
Nice. Okay, Ian, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for all that you've shared here and for pushing back and some of this stuff about the 12 steps and some of the ways that we need it. Honestly, the ways that we need to be going deeper as a church. So thank you for all that you've shared.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. We brought this up in our conversation, but we all have this awareness, it seems, of being broken. And so I'm curious if after listening to that conversation, if you could identify what the brokenness is inside of you. Ian nailed me down. Did you hear that? He nailed me down about the workaholism stuff there, which I was fine to do. That's not something I'm afraid to admit. It is something that I do continue to have to be aware of all the time. And it, like he said, it's one of these addictions where I can't, like a food addiction, I can't stop eating. It's something that is part of my everyday life. So I have to be aware of it and continually ask God, am I putting this as that thing trying to fill that hole? If I put that in there versus allowing you to fill that hole, because ultimately that is what it is about. As Ian says in the book, he says, I discovered I wasn't addicted just to substances. I was also addicted to controlling people, places, things. I was hooked on seeking credentials and titles or needing to be the smartest guy in the room, on notoriety, on winning the approval of others. He said, seriously, I can't get out of bed and walk to the bathroom in the morning without stabbing my toe on one of my many addictions. And he quotes Anne Lamott by saying, getting all of one's addictions under control is a little like putting an octopus to bed. Yes. So what is that thing for you, or the things, since he made it clear that it's not usually just one thing? What are the things for you? And here's ultimately the question, because we can identify what it is. But the thing is that we need to decide what we're going to do with it. You know, I mean, it's one thing to go look and take the car into the mechanic, for the mechanic to go, yeah, no, you need some new brakes. And then you're like, cool. All right. See you later. You know, and you don't do anything about it. It's like, you need to get in there and fix the brakes. So once we realize that we have the problem, we get to decide what we're going to do with it, how we're going to approach it. I would encourage you to check out a book like Ian's. It's called The Fix. The subtitle is How the 12 Steps Offer a Surprising Path of Transformation for the Well-Adjusted, the Down and Out, and Everything in Between. It's great. Honestly, it's a fresh read. I was familiar with the 12 steps just because I now have some family members who have gone to things like Alcoholics Anonymous, and I have the Workaholics Anonymous book. And so I was familiar with the concept. But as I was reading them, I remember thinking, this is very faith-based, and it's very much something that every Christian could use. So Ian's written a great book on how to do that and how to put that together. The workbook sounds awesome too. So pick both of those up and check those out. But I wanted to close by sharing a story that he shares in the book that kind of has to do with talking about what do we do once we've figured out that we have a problem. He describes the story of a woman at the treatment center that he went to for that second time when he was dealing with addiction. And again, that was more than just a primer, as he referred to it as. But he met a woman named Sky, and she asked him to describe his story of what he was like before addiction took over his life. And then after he finishes telling the story, she says, I think you've endured enough already, don't you? And then she told him that she had read the story of a woman who was an early member of AA, who said that the concept of salvation in the Bible has a secondary meaning that few people know about. It means to come home. So he says, I ask you, have you endured enough already? Don't you want salvation so that you can finally come home? And that's my question too. Are you tired enough of allowing this addiction, or whatever you would call it, whatever it looks like, to control your life, to steal the peace, to steal the joy, the freedom that is not filling that hole of what's inside of us, to steal the authentic salvation that Christ brings? He was saying before that we begin these addictions, and at first it seems like they're great. It seems like they solve all of our problems, and we're like, awesome. But then we realize that those addictions come up with their own problems, to the point where those problems become bigger than the issue they were trying to fix themselves. And that's where a lot of us have to hit rock bottom and make a decision. But even if you are not at that place, You don't have to go all the way down to where this problem, this addiction is now stealing your life, ruining your marriage, making you lose your job, all the things that some of us have to walk through. For me, it was a massive health crisis. We don't have to get to that point. Between you and the Lord, you can get alone with him and ask him, God, what are the things in my life that are getting in the way? What are the ways that I have tried to fill this cistern that you've created inside of all of us, this ache, this need? And then to take that next step and to say, God, help me to take the first step in getting healing here. And again, if that is a place you're ready to go, pick out a book like Ian's that's going to give you that next step to living out the reality of what it means to find that healing through some sort of addiction like this, whatever it looks like, using the 12 steps to follow Christ. I love how this book gives legs to what the Bible says and allows people to understand that healing in a step-by-step way, and how filling that hole with Christ is the ultimate goal of our lives. So friends, this was a pretty packed episode with lots of information. I would love to hear from you on Instagram. What are the ways that you struggle with this concept? What are the things that are the addictive things that you're struggling with, whether it is a true addiction in the sense of a traditional way we think of addiction like alcohol or drugs. Is it workaholism? Is it food? Is it porn? Is it going on gambling? He mentioned that. I mean, that's a huge rising thing right now. So yeah, reach out to me on Instagram. It's at Alicia Michelle Coach. I would love to talk to you more about this and to hear your thoughts on some of the things we talked about in this episode. All right, friend, have a great week. I'll see you back here for next week's episode. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining me today for the Christian Mindset Coach. If you loved today's show, would you take 2 seconds and share a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts? I've got a special gift for you when you share a review, my amazing 50 I Am declarations, 50 statements and Bible verses about who you are in Christ. This is an audio meditation and a written statement that is extremely popular with my clients, and I want to give you access just for sharing your Apple Podcast review. Simply screenshot your review and send it to hello@vibrantchristianliving.com, and we'll send you the link to access the 50 I Am Declarations resource. Thanks so much for sharing your rating and review so that we can get the word out about the podcast. See you back here next week.